Let me ask you about Syria, because Syria has now had an attack from ISIS in Damascus over the weekend. Turkey has attacked the U.S. allies, the Syrian Defense Force in northeast Syria. This is such a fragile peace. Is it important to keep some U.S. troops there to make sure that those ISIS prisoners are kept in prison by the Syrian Defense Force, to make sure that the whole thing doesn't collapse and ISIS regain a foothold?
Look, one thing we've learned over the years is that what happens inside of Syria doesn't stay inside of Syria. You see all sorts of consequences that flow out of the country, whether it's the potential for terrorism that goes well beyond Syria, whether it's mass human displacement. So we have a stake in trying to make sure that this extraordinary opportunity that is now before the Syrian people to actually control their own lives and their own destinies, not have a dictator do it, which is the case for the last 5 decades, not have some outside power do it, not have a terrorist group do it. That's the possibility. But you're exactly right. It's incredibly fragile. And I think the U.S. role in trying to help guide this and shape this, along with Arab partners, along with other European partners and others, Turkey, is essential. That means, I believe, keeping some presence, but it also means being very engaged in all of the efforts to help support a Syrian-owned, Syrian-led transition to get the country to a better place.
ISIS has had this incredible propaganda machine, and it's gained strength in the last 4 years, frankly, Mr. Secretary. You know, on your watch and on this administration's watch, more specifically. But they are inspiring lone wolves all over the world, most recently in New Orleans. What can the U.S. do to try to combat the propaganda machine of this terror group, you know, potentially getting a foothold in Syria, but even if they don't, they're inspiring terrorists?
So, Andrea, I think there are 2 things we have to focus on. First is making sure that ISIS doesn't emerge from the box that we put it in. When I say we, I'm talking about what the Obama administration did to take away the so-called caliphate that it developed. It had actually had, for the first time, a terrorist group.
And the Trump administration.
And that's what I wanted to come to. This was a success of the Obama administration, completed by the Trump administration. That caliphate was destroyed. All the territory that they'd taken, mile upon mile, in Iraq and in Syria, was taken back. It was completed by President Trump when Raqqa, the last piece that they held, fell. ISIS was in a box. It's been in a box ever since. But we have to keep it there. And keeping it there will also take away from the potency of its propaganda. You're right. Of course, that propaganda continues. We see lone wolves who are inspired. But without the success of having a caliphate, of controlling all this territory, being able to say, for the first time, we have a terrorist group, ISIS, that controls territory, that really undermines the potency of its message. If that were to change, if we were to allow ISIS out of the box again, there are 10,000 foreign terrorist fighters, ISIS fighters, who are being controlled in detention centers in Syria. We ultimately want to see them get repatriated to their countries of origin, but meanwhile, they need to stay locked down. Our Kurdish friends in the Syrian Defense Forces, they're critical to doing that. That's why, even as we're working with Turkey to deal with its very legitimate concerns about the PKK, a terrorist group that's attacked Turkey for years, we have to do it in a way that avoids a conflict between the Syrian-supported forces in the northeast and the Syrian Defense Forces with the Kurds, and to, over time, integrate those Kurdish forces into a Syrian national force, to have any of their foreign fighters leave Syria. All of that can happen, but we need to give it a little bit of time.
Chris Wray just told 60 Minutes, and the Homeland Security Secretary told me that the greatest threat we're now facing is from China hacking us, from hacking our infrastructure, our telecom companies, our water companies. And this has just increased exponentially. How come we cannot stop this hacking? In terms of Storm Typhoon, we don't know how they got in, how long they've been there, and we don't know how to get them out.
Yeah. So this is an enduring challenge. There's no finish line. This is the nature of the world we live in. It's the nature of competition right now. And what we've done over these past years is to shore up our defenses everywhere, including right here at this department, to do everything possible to detect and uncover these efforts as necessary, to sanction Chinese entities that are involved in it.
Shouldn't there be more consequences? This is a serious threat.
This is going to be something that's going to be with us for a long time. And we have to make sure, as we're doing, that we continue to try to stay ahead of it, both in terms of our defenses, both in terms of taking action as necessary against China, making sure that others are doing the same thing, other countries working from the same page. But there's no finish line. We have to just keep making sure that we're as strongly defended as possible and that there are consequences that flow from these actions.
Climate change is a major threat, and it's a national security threat. We're seeing it in Los Angeles most horrifically now. It's catastrophic.
Yeah.
President Trump last time got out of the Paris Climate Accords. What advice would you have for him about reevaluating climate as a national security threat?
Yeah, Andrea, I think it's exactly as you say. What we've seen is climate change is a driver of so many other things. It's a driver of conflict. It's a driver of mass human displacement. It's obviously a driver of suffering, as we've seen horrifically in Los Angeles. And so it's exactly as you say. It is a national security concern. And I hope that as the administration looks at this, it will take action accordingly. One of the first things President Biden did was to get back into the Paris Accord. But beyond that, we've taken so many steps over the last 4 years to try to make sure that we were doing our part. But here's the challenge. Even if the United States does everything right, from my perspective, in terms of emissions, we're maybe 15% of global emissions. You still got to account for the other 85%, and you've got to bring other countries along. If we're out of the game, it's a lot less likely we'll be able to bring them along. When we're in the game, we've had real success in doing that. So I hope the next administration stays in the game. There's another aspect to this, too, and it goes to the competition with China. So much of the investment that President Biden has made in climate technology, including through the IRA, has been all about winning the competition for the 21st century economy. Because all of these technologies that we're investing in now, China's investing in, and they want to capture markets around the world, and countries around the world want this technology, like electric vehicles. And if we're not in that game, if we're not making these investments, someone else is going to be doing it, and it's China. So I think we have a profound interest in making sure that we continue in something that really is a win-win. It's a win-win in terms of dealing with the climate challenge. It's a win-win in making sure that we continue to have, by far, the leading economy in the world that everyone else looks to.